The conference room echoed with silence as the billionaire stood in crisp silver handcuffs, surrounded by flashing cameras and gasps. He wasn't flinching. His steel blue eyes weren't focused on the board members, the lawyers, or the world outside that glass tower. They were locked on her, one tiny girl, no older than 6, with tear-streaked cheeks and a trembling hand clutching a worn teddy bear. No words passed between them, but something ancient and aching swirled in the air. Regret. Recognition. Love lost and found too late. The CEO's name echoed like a curse in the room, but in her eyes, there was no hate, only sorrow. Behind him, a Time magazine cover sat open on the table, his face smiling, powerful. The headline: Titan of Industry, the Untouchable King. Now, that king stood dethroned, undone, not by scandal, not by rivals, but by the eyes of a child who reminded him of who he used to be. A voice whispered in the background. He built an empire, but he couldn't save her. The room held its breath, but only one heart raced. Hers. The little girl didn't fully understand what this man meant to the world, or even to her, but something ancient inside her did. Her tiny fingers gripped the edge of her teddy bear tighter as her feet shuffled forward, inching past reporters and cold marble tile. The men in suits didn't see her, or they did, and dismissed her. But the billionaire saw her, and the walls around his expression cracked like ice under fire. She stopped just 3 steps away from him. Not a word. Just a stare that cut deeper than any indictment. The CEO's lips twitched like he wanted to speak, to say her name, but shame silenced him. The child looked down. "You left," she whispered. "That was all. I'm the and now." The cold king, now dethroned, finally blinked. One tear fell, not from the girl, from him. Long before the headlines, the empire, or the glass tower, there was a promise. One he made in the quiet of a hospital room, where a newborn slept in a bassinet, and a woman held his hand. "You'll always be there for her," she whispered, tears and love entwined. He nodded. Meant it. But somewhere between IPOs and hostile takeovers, the promise faded into the margins of quarterly reports. Now, as he stood handcuffed, those memories surged like a flood he could no longer hold back. The child's eyes didn't just see him, they mirrored the woman he'd once loved. And failed. In that moment, he wasn't a CEO or a criminal. He was a father. And he had broken everything. The silence after her whisper was louder than a courtroom verdict. A man who once commanded armies of lawyers and entire stock exchanges couldn't summon a single word. Around them, the storm of judgment pressed in, cameras rolled, pens scribbled. But none of it mattered. Only the child did. Her small voice had shaken an empire more than any market crash. The guard stepped forward, ready to move him. But he raised one hand, not in resistance but in silent plea. His voice cracked. "Give me 1 minute." Even the reporters froze. The child tilted her head. Her innocence wasn't a weapon, but it pierced more than rage ever could. She stepped closer, not with fear, but with the tentative grace of a child who only wanted answers. "Are you my dad?" she asked. The world held its breath. His lips parted, but his voice caught. He nodded. Not with pride but with guilt. "I was supposed to be." Her eyes scanned his face like a puzzle. She didn't cry. Instead, she placed the teddy bear into his cuffed hands. "Then don't leave again." And just like that, the cold heart of a billionaire, once encased in ambition, money, and power, began to thaw. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, felt something real. Before the power, before the headlines, before the betrayal, there was only a boy, 10 years old, sitting on a concrete stoop, outside a run-down apartment, staring into the fading sunlight. His mother's voice echoed from inside, muffled by exhaustion and another failed interview. "Why? They said I'm too old." Again. The boy clenched his fists, jaw tight, heart burning with helpless fury. He looked around at the peeling walls, the leaking faucet, the unopened bills. He made a silent vow that day, not to be rich, not to be famous, but to never be powerless again. As his mother stepped out, weary and smiling anyway, he stood up and hugged her fiercely. She never knew the promise he made, but it shaped everything. That was the beginning, not of a business, but of the wound he spent a lifetime covering with gold. His mother never asked for much. Just love, honesty, and time. But time was the one thing the boy knew they had too little of. Every hour was a sacrifice. School, work, sleep, all blurred into survival. He'd sit across from her at a tiny kitchen table, doing homework while she stitched clothes under a yellow lamp that buzzed. One day, he whispered, "I'll buy you a house with lights that never flicker." She smiled but didn't answer. Maybe she believed him. Maybe she didn't. But her eyes held pride, and that was enough. That flickering light became a symbol burned in his soul, not of poverty, but of purpose. He wasn't chasing money. He was chasing safety. Control. A world where nothing flickered, nothing failed, and no one said, "We can't afford that." When he was 13, something snapped. He overheard two landlords laughing about raising the rent. They'll crawl before they complain. That night, he broke into the library and read every book on money he could find. Real estate, investing, business strategy, words that became weapons. While other kids played video games, he dissected company filings. While others slept, he built spreadsheets on public computers. No one noticed. No one praised him. But in his mind, he was building a ladder. Every data point was a rung. Every book was a brick in his castle. It wasn't about revenge. It was about control. And it all started in that dusty corner of a library where ambition grew in silence. By 17, he was making more in online arbitrage than his mother did in a month. But he never told her. He kept it hidden, fearing it would burden her dreams. Instead, he just started paying bills. Quietly. Slipping rent into her purse. Leaving grocery bags on the counter. She thought it was a miracle. He smiled, and let her believe in miracles. But inside, the fire only grew hotter. Every small win was still not enough. She still came home tired. She still skipped doctor appointments. Success became an obsession, not for glory, but for rescue. He wasn't building a life. He was building a raft, plank by plank, to pull them out of the storm. The last time he saw her alive, she was wearing the same sweater she'd worn for years. They had fought, about him skipping her birthday again, about how cold he had become. "I didn't raise you to be this stranger," she had said. He had snapped back. "I didn't become this for me. I did it for you." Her silence hurt more than any insult. She simply turned, whispered, "I just wanted my son," and walked away. A week later she was gone. The guilt didn't come in waves. It was constant, like gravity. And it didn't just fuel his rise. It haunted every deal, every smile, every boardroom victory. Because all he ever wanted was to make her proud. And all she ever wanted was him. At 19, he launched his first company from a basement with cracked walls and borrowed Wi-Fi. The startup world didn't welcome him. It ignored him. But silence was fuel. He worked nights while pretending to attend college. His friends partied, fell in love, and made memories. He built code, answered customer emails, and pitched to faceless investors who hung up mid-sentence. Sleep came in 90-minute bursts on a second-hand couch. He stopped celebrating birthdays. Missed his mother's memorial again. Every success came wrapped in loneliness. But when the numbers spiked, his first profit, his first contract, he smiled at the ceiling, whispered, "We're getting there, Mom," and went back to work. Not because he was greedy, because he didn't know how to stop. As his empire grew, so did the silence. Partners came and went. Relationships flickered and died like faulty lights. He forgot names. Missed weddings. Once, during a board meeting, His assistant whispered that his college roommate had died in a crash. He blinked and said, "Reschedule condolences for next week." The room nodded. No one questioned him. That was the danger of success. It made you godlike. But gods don't grieve, do they? Later that night, alone in the office, he stared at the email again. The cursor blinked. So did his eyes. Then he opened his calendar and filled every hour with meetings. It was easier to lose yourself in strategy than memory. The company went public with a valuation that turned headlines into worship. News anchors called him the new kingmaker. But even kings eat alone. On the night of the IPO, while champagne popped and executives toasted under golden lights, he slipped out the back, down the elevator, into a car. He told the driver to just drive. No destination, just motion. Out the window, the city blurred. Skyscrapers he helped fund rose like tombstones. He looked at his reflection in the glass. The suit was perfect. The face unbothered. But his eyes? They were empty. He thought of his mother's hands. The way she always knew when he was lying. Would she recognize me now? He wondered. He didn't know the answer. He built campuses, bought companies, crushed competitors with a signature. His empire grew faster than he could feel it. But one day he forgot the password to his old email, the one his mother used to write to. The tech team recovered it. Thousands of unread messages. One subject line stood out. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Sent 2 years after her passing. He opened it. Empty. No body. Just the subject. A glitch, perhaps. Or something more. He stared at it until his eyes burned. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat at his office window until dawn, watching as light bled into the skyline. He didn't cry. He couldn't. But something inside him began to crack. Eventually, the world noticed. He never smiles, doesn't date, works through holidays. The headlines shifted from awe to curiosity. Is success making us lonely? But he didn't care. Or pretended not to. He built walls of iron and routine. His schedule became armor. No room for emotion, for softness, for risk. He hired assistants to remember birthdays. Of others. Not his own. He lost track of time. One day bled into the next. And when he looked in the mirror, he didn't see a man. He saw a monument. Carved in ambition. Eroded by isolation. One that no one would ever touch, until a child did. But that day hadn't come yet. Not then. It began with a letter. Not from a lawyer or rival, but from a hospital. The envelope was thin, official. The CEO almost tossed it aside, until he saw the name. Hers. Not his mother. Another name. One he didn't recognize. But beside it, emergency contact, his name. Confused, he opened it. Inside was a birth certificate. A child's. A daughter. Born 6 years ago. New. Mother, Lena Wright. His college ex. The same Lena he left behind during his first funding round, saying, "There's no space for love in what I'm building." He had never known. Or so he told himself. But in the pit of his stomach, guilt bloomed like poison. He read the certificate again. A daughter. A life he never knew. Or had chosen not to know. Suddenly, the empire felt hollow, and the floor beneath him began to crack. He flew to the hospital listed in the letter. Not as a CEO. As a man unraveling. When he arrived, the receptionist hesitated. Then pointed down the hall. Room 304. Inside, a little girl asleep in a hospital bed, hooked to machines too large for her frame. At her side sat Lena, older, thinner, tired, but eyes still sharp. She looked up and froze. "You don't get to walk in now," she said coldly. He said nothing. Just stared at the girl. Her hand twitched in her sleep. A teddy bear slipped from her fingers. "She's yours," Lena whispered, voice cracking. She always asked about the man in the picture. He stepped forward slowly, as if one wrong move would break the universe. What's her name? He asked. Arya, she said. Your daughter. Arya's condition was rare. Not fatal. Yet. But the treatments were expensive, experimental, and emotionally draining. Lena had tried everything. Every dollar, every favor, every call unanswered. She never contacted him, by choice. You were building your empire, she said. I didn't want her to be your footnote. But now the girl needed a miracle. And so, Lena broke the silence. As the doctor explained the condition, the CEO's mind drifted. Numbers, stats, investment rounds, they all meant nothing now. He looked at his daughter's small fingers gripping her blanket. Can I talk to her? He asked. Lena hesitated, then nodded. She doesn't know who you are. He entered slowly. Arya blinked at him, groggy. Are you the man from Mommy's photo? He nodded. Yes, I'm your dad. The collapse wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. A whisper in the boardroom. A hesitation from investors. A media leak. Undisclosed paternity scandal rocks Titan Tech CEO. Photos of Arya surfaced. Of Lena. What? Of the hospital visits. Stocks dipped. Executives panicked. This could be spun, his PR head insisted. But he didn't care. For the first time, he missed a board meeting. Sat in a children's cancer wing reading picture books instead. Lena watched from the door, stunned. The man who once weaponized time now spent hours teaching a 6-year-old how to draw trees. You're different, Lena said one evening. He didn't look up. No, he replied. I'm just remembering who I was, before I forgot. Weeks passed. Treatment began. Arya grew stronger, slowly. He stayed. Every day. Meetings were missed, partnerships collapsed. But none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was Arya's laugh when he made paper birds. Her whisper when she asked, Will you be here tomorrow too? And one morning, while he was tying her shoes, she said, You're the best part of my story. He froze. Looked up. She smiled, genuinely. In that moment, his empire didn't fall. It transformed. Not into ruins. Into roots. Deep, real, unshakable. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was a father. And for the first time he realized, they were never the same thing. The boardroom was packed. Cameras mounted discreetly. Investors anxious. The vote had been called. A hostile acquisition loomed. One that would triple profits but force mass layoffs and shutter the company's community initiatives. The CEO sat at the head of the table, Arya's crayon drawing folded neatly in his breast pocket. Whispers circled him. He's losing focus, sentimental weakness. They expected the old version of him, the razor-sharp tactician. Instead, he stood slowly and removed his watch, placing it on the table. I used to think time was everything, he said. But I was wrong. A few murmurs. Then, silence. I vote no. Gasps echoed. I won't burn down everything we built, just to win one more game. The motion failed. The empire stayed intact, but it was a new kind of empire now. After the meeting, headlines exploded. CEO tanks billion-dollar deal for moral reasons. Critics laughed. Analysts predicted ruin. But the employees? They cheered. For the first time, the man behind the title had spoken with a voice that felt human. That evening, he walked into Arya's room and found her asleep, a paper crown made from a hospital tray menu on her head. He sat beside her whispering, I said no for you, for the world you'll grow up in. Her eyes fluttered open. You're home, she murmured. He nodded, brushing her hair gently. Always. In that single word, he reclaimed a promise once broken. Not through grand gestures, but by choosing her again and again, even when the world shouted not to. The next day, Lena met him in the hallway. Her arms crossed, eyes searching. "You really gave it all up?" she asked. He didn't flinch. "No," he replied. "I finally gave it to the right things." Her face softened. "She's always needed you. Not your money." He nodded. "I'm learning." They stood in silence, 1,000 unsaid things stretching between them. Finally she asked, "Do you want to be her father?" His voice broke slightly. "I already am." Lena didn't smile, but she placed a hand on his arm, just for a moment. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something close. And for the first time in decades he felt seen. Not as a mogul, not as a machine, but as a man. Later that week he stood in front of his executive team and announced he'd be stepping back. Not resigning, but restructuring. "From now on, this company doesn't just answer to shareholders. It answers to our children, our cities, our futures." Some rolled their eyes. Others stood and applauded. The news cycle buzzed again. "CEO goes soft, power to purpose." He didn't care. He walked out of that press conference, not as the untouchable CEO, but as a man finally grounded. Outside, Arya waited in a wheelchair, her arms outstretched. "Dad," she shouted. He lifted her high into the sky, spinning her in the sunlight. Cameras clicked. Headlines formed. But none of it mattered. Not anymore. That night, back in the penthouse, he opened the balcony doors wide. City lights shimmered. But instead of pouring a drink or reviewing reports, he knelt beside Arya, building Lego towers. "This is way harder than mergers," he joked. She giggled. "You're doing it wrong." He laughed too, truly, deeply. And when the tower collapsed, they didn't curse. They rebuilt. Piece by piece. Later, Arya fell asleep in his arms, breathing soft against his chest. He looked up at the sky, at the world he once thought he owned. And for the first time, he didn't feel small or hollow. He felt full. Because the world wasn't his anymore. She was. And that was more than enough. The months passed in quiet transformation. Arya's treatment continued. Some days were harder than others. Nausea, tears, long silences. But he was there. Always. Reading to her, singing off-key lullabies, learning how to braid tiny braids with trembling hands. The empire, once fed by relentless ambition, now bent gently to his new rhythm. He brought Arya to office town halls. Let her color during strategy sessions. And slowly, without commands or directives, his leadership team began changing too. More empathy. More balance. His presence became less sharp, more still. One day, Arya handed him a drawing. Her, him, Lena, and a big house with a dog. "It's our next company," she said. "Called Family." He choked on a laugh. "Let's build it." He sold one of his companies. Quietly. No fanfare. The funds went into a foundation, Arya's wish. It offered treatments for children who, like her, needed more than luck. When asked why, he simply replied, "Because I should have known sooner." Reporters tried to paint him as redeemed. He denied it. "I'm not fixed," he said. "I'm still learning how to show up." He visited schools. Sat on the floor with kids. Answered hard questions. And when they asked what he did for a living, he didn't say CEO anymore. He said, "I'm a dad. That's my best job." It wasn't branding. It was truth. Because every time Arya laughed, he felt richer than he ever had at any IPO. Lena didn't rush back into his life. She watched from the periphery. But slowly, painfully, she began to trust. They co-parented like two exiles learning to share shelter. Arya was the bridge. And on the day she came home from the hospital, free of wires and weight, the three of them sat on the old apartment stoop where it had all begun. "Funny," he said. "I built skyscrapers just to end up here again." Lena smiled faintly. Maybe this was the foundation all along. They didn't kiss. They didn't pretend the past hadn't hurt. But they watched their daughter draw chalk hearts on the sidewalk, and for the first time he didn't feel like he was chasing something. He was standing in it. Time moved differently now. Slower. Softer. He no longer rushed through mornings or drowned nights in spreadsheets. He learned to cook, badly, but with heart. He burned pancakes, forgot syrup, and laughed when Arya rated them a 5 out of 10. Sundays became sacred. No calls, no meetings, just board games and music. One evening, as Arya fell asleep beside him on the couch, he stared at the ceiling and whispered, "I missed so much." Lena, sitting nearby, replied, "But you came back. Not everyone gets to return." But he had. And while the world still knew him as a legend of industry, she and Arya knew the truth. He was just a man who finally chose to love more than he feared. On the anniversary of his mother's passing, he brought Arya to her grave. The wind was gentle. He placed lilies down and stood in silence. "She would have loved you," he whispered. Arya held his hand. "Do you think she sees us?" He smiled faintly. "I think she always has." As they walked away, Arya skipped ahead, twirling. Lena waited by the car, eyes shining. He turned back once, just once, to the headstone. "I kept the promise," he said quietly. "It took a lifetime, but I did." Then he caught up with Arya, lifting her into his arms. The sun dipped low behind them, and for the first time, the past no longer chased him. It walked beside him, in peace. Years later, the story of the fallen Titan who chose family became a quiet legend. He was no longer in headlines. His name faded from the business channels, but it echoed in classrooms, hospitals, and shelters. One afternoon, Arya walked into her school auditorium to find him standing nervously behind a podium. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. He straightened his tie, sheepish. "Career day. I got invited by someone pretty cool." Arya giggled and took her seat. When his turn came, he didn't mention mergers or acquisitions. "Once I ran a company," he began. "But it never mattered as much as the day I learned to be someone's dad." The room fell quiet. Arya beamed. And in that moment he wasn't just a speaker, he was the living proof of a second chance. Later that evening, he found Arya in her room, sorting through old boxes. She held up the paper crown from the hospital. "You kept this?" He nodded. "It was the first thing you gave me." She smiled. "Want to try it on again?" He laughed. "It barely fit me then." Still, he knelt, and she placed it gently on his head. In that silly, quiet moment, he felt something deeper than ceremony. She leaned in, serious for a second. "You know, I don't remember you from when I was little, but I remember when you came back." He looked at her, heart caught. "That's the only part I want you to remember." She hugged him tight. "Me, too." On the first day of middle school, Arya paused at the boardroom-sized table, now repurposed as their breakfast nook. She adjusted her backpack and turned to him. "I'm scared." He crouched beside her. "You'll be brilliant, like always." She didn't smile. "Will you be here when I get back?" He looked her straight in the eye. "Always." This time, she believed him. She ran out the door, hair bouncing, shoes untied. He watched from the window as she joined the crowd. For a moment he stood there unmoving. Then he walked to the old desk drawer, pulled out an offer letter from a tech giant, one offering more money, more travel, more status. He quietly ripped it in half and smiled. The decision had already been made. At a charity gala years later, a journalist found him standing at the edge of the room, watching Arya give her first keynote speech. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The power, the influence." He didn't turn. "You're looking at it," he said. Arya's voice rang through the crowd, speaking of equity, innovation, and care. She was fierce, graceful, unstoppable. A different kind of leader. One born not from legacy, but from love. When she finished, she pointed to him in the crowd. "Everything I am started with the man who chose me over everything else." Applause erupted. He blinked back tears. The journalist whispered, "That's your legacy." He nodded. "And it's more than enough." Fireworks bloomed over the city skyline. From the quiet balcony of their home, he and Arya stood side by side. She was taller now. Stronger. "We've come a long way," she said. He nodded. "From boardrooms to bedtime stories." She laughed. "From missed birthdays to every moment." A long pause. Then she asked, "Do you ever miss who you were?" He looked up at the stars. "No," he said softly. "He left the company, but never left you." She turned to him. "Good." And then, without another word, she placed her hand on his. They stood in silence as the sky erupted in color behind them. No need for more. This was the story's final line, and it didn't need to be spoken.